Have you heard the recent and very chilling story of Valeria Marquez? She was a beautiful, popular salon owner, always live streaming from her salon in Mexico, and she had built up quite a large following over the years. Valeria was the kind of woman that people followed because her life seemed vibrant, enviable, and perfect, and her followers adored her. So when Valeria's assistant told her that a surprise gift was coming for her, she waited around that day. She smiled warmly into the camera, and it was all caught on live stream, unfolding in real time for thousands to see. But when her salon door opened and a man walked towards Valeria with this supposed gift, it wasn't flowers or chocolates, it was a gun. And in seconds, her life was taken from her. It was sudden, horrific, and devastating. It seems impossible. How could a woman so loved, so admired, someone who appeared to have everything, be caught off guard in such a cruel way and killed like that in front of thousands of people watching? But as shocking as Valeria's murder was, she is not the first. Nearly 2 decades before, in an affluent neighborhood in Atlanta, another woman, equally beautiful, equally admired, and equally unsuspecting, answered her front door, expecting kindness and generosity, a gift, a bouquet of beautiful flowers. Her name was Lita, and she too was living what many saw as the dream life, luxury, influence, and charm. But hidden beneath that perfect image was a story darker and more twisted than anyone could have ever known. Sometimes the deadliest threats hide behind the most innocent gestures, and the most perfect lives can hide the darkest secrets of all. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. And if you've never been here before, I'm Kimbyrleigha. It's nice to finally meet you. And a lot of you have told me that Sherry Papini has used my famous line in her new documentary, "Nice to finally meet you." Well, I said it first, Sherry.
I'm Sherry Papini. Nice to finally meet you.
It's kind of creepy. We were both born the same month and the same year, only a few days apart. My birthday is actually this Saturday, June 7th. And every year that I get older, I'm trying to be my best, eat my best, be healthy. And that is where these little gummies that I'm going to be talking about come in, these little green bears. You've seen me talk about Grüns before. They are still part of my daily routine, one of the easiest routines I have, actually. Grüns are gummy vitamins. They're designed to provide comprehensive daily nutrition. Now, I started taking Grüns because I did my research, and most supplements fall short. I'm interested in things like healthy skin and hair and nails, and basic multivitamins are limited. Greens powders are messy, I don't like the taste, and a probiotic is only part of the puzzle. But Grüns is all of those things and more packed into just 8 delicious gummies a day. And you know what? They really do taste good, like a fruit snack. They're really, really yummy. Now you might be wondering, Kimber, 8? Why 8 gummies? Well, cramming 20 plus vitamins and minerals and 60 plus whole food ingredients into just one gummy is not realistic. Plus, Grüns contain 6 times the gut health ingredients compared to leading greens powder. They contain biotin and niacinamide, which results in thicker hair, nails, and skin health. They've got super mushrooms, which promote brain and gut health while supporting whole body health as well. They also have vitamin C, which reduces immunity-damaging, stress-inducing free radicals. With Grüns, you'll start seeing a difference in the first 30 days, whether that's better digestion, more regular bathroom trips, fewer snack cravings, and way more steady energy throughout the day. People say I do so much in one day, might be part of my daily routine with Grüns. And at the end of the day, Grüns isn't just another supplement, it's a smarter way to nourish your body. One daily pack, no guesswork, and a taste that you'll actually look forward to. So if you're ready to feel the difference, try Grüns today and get 52% off. Just click my link below in my description box. And thank you so much to Grüns for making this video possible and sponsoring my channel. Now let's get into the video for today. If you close your eyes and imagine Atlanta back in the 1960s and 70s, you might picture civil rights marches, protests, and segregated schools, which are images that are accurate. But there was another side to Atlanta that people rarely talked about: the thriving, proud, and incredibly ambitious elite. But not the white elite, I'm talking about the Black elite. This was the world that Lida McClinton was born into, a world both privileged and complex. She was born on January 7th of 1952 to her parents Emery and Joanne McClinton. The McClintons weren't just another family in the neighborhood. They were political trailblazers, community icons, and the type of family whose name opened doors. You could think of them like the Obamas of their time for reference. Lida's father, Emery, was influential and respected, serving on Georgia's State Board of Transportation. He wasn't just involved, he was a pillar in the community. You know those quiet, wise, reliable figures who just give off that sense of calm authority? That was Emery, a man who understood influence, and it wasn't just about money or power, but about integrity and community. He raised his family not with just rules, but with a deep sense of respect for other people. And then there was Lida's mother, Joanne. Imagine the elegance and strength of someone who stood confidently alongside figures like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Joanne was a powerful legislator in the Georgia State Assembly. She wasn't just an observer of history. This woman was part of it. She managed the groundbreaking campaign of Maynard Jackson, who became Atlanta's first Black mayor. Imagine being raised by a woman whose day-to-day life was making history. What kind of impact that will leave on you? Growing up, Lida was surrounded by this powerful mix of ambition, activism, and deep community responsibility. It was a home filled with political debates at dinner time, discussions about social progress, and conversations about the future. Not just her future, but the future of an entire community. Lida wasn't the only child. She had a younger sister, Valencia, and a younger brother, Emery Jr., and together the three McClinton children were inseparable. Their bond was a special blend of deep love, fierce loyalty, and playful sibling rivalry that anyone with siblings knows all too well. Valencia and Lida shared a very close bond together. They would whisper late-night secrets, experiment with makeup, and share clothes from their mom's closet, actually. So imagine, I don't know, you and your friends staying up really late, watching a movie, YouTube makeup tutorials. That was what it was like, but back then, they just did it in their own way. They would experiment in the mirror, trying out different hairstyles from magazine clippings. They were confidants, protectors of each other's secrets, and allies in navigating their strict upbringing. Her brother Emery Jr. was younger. He was the baby of the family. Protective older sisters know this feeling that Lida and Valencia had. They often teased him, but they were fiercely protective of him. They wouldn't let anyone hurt him. And their parents held high expectations for all three of them, but especially for Emery Jr., the only boy, who carried the family name forward. He felt pressure to measure up to his father's respected image, and Lida often softened that burden, stepping in with kindness and becoming both his mentor and his comfort. This trio wasn't just siblings, they were a team. They navigated their world together. And anyone who has grown up with siblings close in age know about getting in trouble together, of course, sharing secrets, protecting one another. And that's exactly how this felt. Their childhood wasn't ordinary, though. The McClintons were part of what's called the Jack and Jill of America. This was an exclusive organization aimed at nurturing leadership and cultural pride among the Black community, especially youth, from prominent families. If you try to imagine how it would be today, you could picture it as an exclusive social club, only instead of people like influencers and YouTubers and TikTok stars, I guess. The kids were being groomed to be famous leaders, future lawyers, politicians, and pillars of their community. Jack and Jill wasn't about parties, though they were certainly glamorous, but it was about leadership training, cultural enrichment, charity work, and creating tight-knit friendships that would last a lifetime. Lida moved effortlessly through this world, elegant, even as a child, charismatic without even trying, and she learned poise, public speaking, etiquette, and how to be a diplomat, skills that her parents considered essential for success in an influential life. And then there were the debutante balls and cotillions, events that most people today might think of as something out of Bridgerton. But these weren't just parties. They were carefully orchestrated ceremonies that introduced young women into society. Girls wore long white gowns, gloves, they practiced dances like the waltz, and learned etiquette rules that were strict and demanding. But here's the thing. Lida actually loved it. She thrived in these environments. She found joy in the structure, the elegance, and the grace that it required. If this were today, She might have been the kind of girl who thrived at New York Fashion Week, or who would naturally excel as an influencer, organizing chic brunches or glamorous charity galas. Her parents saw it as a preparation for her life, but for Lida, it was a canvas for her self-expression and a stage for her natural charisma. But despite their privilege, life wasn't always smooth for them. Lida's family was prominent, they were influential and respected, but still, Black in the deeply segregated South, that was their reality. Their money, education, and connections didn't protect them entirely from the prejudice and racism of the time. Lida and her siblings experienced discrimination firsthand. At times it would be subtle, and at other times it was overt and painful. When the McClinton children enrolled at St. Pius High School, they were among the first Black students admitted. So you can just imagine walking into a classroom or hallway and instantly feeling like you don't belong. Not because you can't measure up academically or socially, but simply because of the color of your skin. It took resilience and courage and quiet strength to navigate those hallways, and Lida did it with grace. She leaned on her siblings for support. Her sisters provided that emotional support she needed, sharing silent nods of understanding, while Emery Jr. would deflect tension with humor. And they faced adversity together, and the experiences made their family bonds even stronger. When it was time for college, Lida chose Spelman, one of the country's most prestigious historically Black colleges, and her parents had hoped that she would follow directly into politics or law, something that matched their ambitions. But Lida saw college as a chance to discover herself on her own terms. Political science became her major, not out of parental pressure, but genuine interest, the curiosity she had about the world, and the determination to understand how power worked. At Spelman, she flourished. She made the dean's list, she excelled academically, and deepened friendships that would last a lifetime. College was her first true taste of freedom, a moment many young people today understand very deeply. Finally being away from your parents' supervision, exploring life and your identity, and figuring out who you are. So you know that saying that opposites attract? It sounds romantic at times, but other times, being too different can lead you down a path that you never imagined. Somewhere dangerous and heartbreaking. And that's exactly how it was when Lida met James Sullivan in 1976. Now, at this point, Lida was thriving. She had built a promising career in fashion. She was managing clients at T. Edwards, an upscale boutique at Atlanta's elite Lenox Square Mall. You can think of it as today's luxury shops in places like Rodeo Drive or Fifth Avenue, where every interaction felt personalized and chic. And Lida loved the rush of helping someone discover their new style, the excitement of clients leaving her store confident and glowing. But one day, a customer walked through the doors who was about to change everything. James Vincent Sullivan. He wasn't like her usual client. At first glance, he actually looked out of place. Awkward. He wore oversized glasses, polyester pants, and colors that shouted, okay, I'm very new to this style thing. And he only owned 2 pairs of pants, a red pair and a green pair. So it was definitely an outsider vibe, someone very eager to get familiar with high fashion. But what he lacked in style, James made up for with his charisma and his ambition. And charisma was something that Lida deeply understood because she had it as well. James wasn't from the South. He wasn't even from wealth or privilege. James was born and raised in Dorchester, a working Irish Catholic neighborhood near Boston. Blue-collar streets lined with wooden triple-decker homes, families working paycheck to paycheck, far removed from Lida's privileged Atlanta upbringing. His family wasn't connected or affluent, they were just living simple lives. And James knew early that if he wanted something more, he would have to hustle, and hustle he did. James worked hard academically, landing a spot at the prestigious Boston Latin School, known for its rigorous classical education and high-achieving graduates. He attended College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts on a scholarship, graduating in 1962 with an economics degree. James was clever, driven, and ambitious. He joined clubs like the Student Newspaper and the Economic Society, always positioning himself strategically to advance his future. He then earned his master's in finance from Boston University, laying the foundation for a career that promised wealth and status. He then landed a job at a major Boston department store, Jordan Marsh. Who remembers Jordan Marsh from the old days? I do. And then he climbed the ranks at a major accounting firm, Peat, Marwick, and Mitchell. Professionally, James was making his name known. Yet no matter how high he climbed, James felt something was missing in his life. And his life took a turn when James's wealthy uncle Frank, who ran a successful liquor distribution company called Crown Beverages in Macon, Georgia, called him down south in 1973. Frank didn't have kids, and he wanted someone from the family to inherit his thriving business. James, of course, was eager to escape the predictability of Boston and finally have some true success. So they agreed that the company would pass to him when Frank died. And in 1975, Frank had a heart attack and passed away. And then overnight, James Sullivan became the sole owner of Crown Beverages, a multi-million-dollar company. So imagine that feeling. One minute you're struggling to impress, and the next, you hit the jackpot. It was every hustler's dream. But for James, it came with a bitter feeling of suspicion from Frank's employees who felt that James just didn't earn this sudden wealth and power. And adding to the drama, James was a divorced father of 4. Yes, James had 4 kids, but he rarely talked about them. He had left them behind with his first wife, Catherine Murray, and he provided very little financial support. James wasn't interested in playing family man. He wanted wealth, status, and respect. And now he finally had it. But despite his newfound riches, James still seemed unsatisfied. Making was fine, but James's ambitions were larger than Georgia. He dreamed of a bigger life, a prestigious social circle, lavish home, and recognition among society's elite. He wanted Palm Beach, one of the most affluent and exclusive communities in America. Think Beverly Hills or the Hamptons today. So when James walked into Lita's life, he represented everything she didn't know. He was older, he was white, and he was from a very different social class. Her parents immediately sensed red flags, not just because of race, but because James was kind of detached. He was unpolished, and he was just like a little too mysterious. But that's what intrigued Lita. He was ambitious and he had honesty. He came from a humble beginning, and she saw potential in him. James was kind of like her project, someone that she thought she could shape and refine, kind of like the ultimate glow up, and it was a challenge for her. Okay, I don't know if anyone saw that candle just literally jump off of my fireplace mantle. I don't usually stop in the middle of these videos, but that was so scary. Okay, but imagine the excitement of taking someone from awkwardness to sophistication. Lita loved the idea of transforming James from polyester suits to tailored elegance. She restyled his hair, she traded out his bulky glasses for contact lenses, and introduced him to the high-end suits and luxury fashion. And soon, James transformed from a clumsy outsider to a polished businessman. It was like the Cinderella story, if Cinderella was wearing Armani suits and Rolex watches. And Lita was falling for James fast. But romance isn't only about fashion and style, and Lita's family had deep concerns. There was a big age difference. He was a decade older. There were cultural contrasts, and of course, the unspoken tensions around interracial relationships in the 1970s South, and that was heavy on their minds. Back then, a Black person and a white person together wasn't just complicated, it was scandalous in some circles. Back when Lita and James first started dating, the world wasn't exactly rushing to embrace relationships like theirs. We're talking about a time when interracial couples weren't just rare, they were very controversial. Primetime TV had just shown its first regular interracial couple on The Jeffersons, and people were still clutching their damn pearls about it. Representation was barely scratching the surface. Today, you might scroll past thousands of couples just like them, sharing their love stories. But back then, just walking in a room together would make people stop, stare, and start talking under their breath, sometimes out loud right to them. And sure, Atlanta had its progressive corners, but Macon wasn't one of them. That's where James lived. And the vibe there was very old school, a lot of less open-minded people, and Lita's parents knew what she was stepping into dating him. Their daughter was a young Black woman from a respected, politically connected family. If she was getting interested in being with an older white man with a completely different background, they tried to explain to her that it wasn't just about love. This came with a lot of layers: race, class, power dynamics, reputation. They didn't want to control her. And it wasn't that they forbid it. It wasn't that kind of situation. It was more like, are you sure you know what this means for you? Because the marriage wouldn't exist in a vacuum for her. People are going to talk, they're going to judge. And relationships that look unconventional, especially in the South during that time, didn't always exist peacefully. Her parents were just worried that she might be making a mistake, that she was mistaking boldness for stability, that this relationship was moving way too fast for anyone to truly see it clearly. But Lita was a grown woman. She was confident, she was headstrong, And she didn't need anyone to co-sign her decisions, especially her parents. So when James proposed to her, she said yes. And the wedding was set. But then the night before they got married, James dropped the kind of truth that should have ended everything right there for many women. He admitted to her for the very first time since they had been dating that he had been married before. But not just married, he had 4 children. He had kept that a secret. There was no warning, no lead up to this, just bam, here's the reality that you're marrying into. It was kind of like one of those episodes of Who the F Did I Marry, right? And by the way, that wasn't the only surprise that James had for her. Because apparently, dropping the existence of 4 hidden children wasn't enough that night. James hit Lita with one more bomb. This time it came in the form of a contract. Paperwork just hours before their wedding. He hands her a prenuptial agreement, yes. The message was clear. If this didn't work out, Lita would walk away with almost nothing. This woman had no real time to process anything. No lawyer, no deep conversation, just a document and a sign here. She was already panicking. The ceremony was set. People were expecting a wedding, so canceling was just not an option. And she would also be heartbroken. It would be a full-blown social disaster if she canceled this wedding now. She was stuck. She was overwhelmed. She was blindsided with no space to really think it through. So she signed it. And that was that. On December 29th of 1976, Lita and James Sullivan got married in a small private ceremony in Macon, Georgia. Her great-uncle, Reverend John Robert Smith, officiated the service. It should have been one of the happiest days of her life. But her mother would describe it later as the worst day of hers. Because for Joanne McClinton, Lita's mom, it didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like she was watching her daughter step into something that could never be undone. And after the wedding, Lita left behind her job at the department store she worked at, and then she left behind Atlanta altogether. The energy, the community, her independence, she just forgot about that. And she followed James to Macon, where they moved into a massive $350,000 mansion on Nottingham Drive in one of the city's wealthiest neighborhoods, Shirley Hills. Now on paper, it looked like a dream. This was a huge house in a gated community with an elegant lifestyle ahead of her. But in reality, what was going on was hostile. Macon wasn't nice to them. People didn't bother hiding that they were racist. Trash would be thrown into their lawn. They even put watermelon rinds there, deliberately left there. And this was a sign. It was offensive. And this wasn't just ignorance. It was calculated disrespect. The kind of slow, aggressive bullying that will seep into your everyday life and try to make you feel like you don't belong somewhere. And Lita tried her best. She put on a brave face every time she tried to get involved in the community, show people who she really was, a likable, nice person, down to earth, nothing that anybody should hate about her. She volunteered with the American Heart Association. She helped the Miss Macon Scholarship Pageant. And James got himself a seat on the board of local arts and science museum. From the outside, they looked like the picture-perfect, civic-minded couple. They were wealthy, generously involved. But behind that front door of their house, there were things already going on. There were cracks showing in their relationships. And friends noticed it first. When it came to money, James looks very successful, right? He's wearing the suits. He's hosting these dinner parties. He's talking the way a man would talk with a lot of assets. But the way he handled money inside the house was kind of bizarre. Let me give you a little insight from one of their friends, Jane Marlowe, who was over their house one day. She reached to toss the last sheet from a roll of paper towels into the garbage can. Just a normal thing that you would do without thinking. You know that last little part of the roll? Lita had to stop her. She said, wait a minute. James insists on keeping that last little sheet to wipe his hands. You can't waste it. She told her friends that he reused plastic garment bags from the dry cleaner as cling wrap in their kitchen for food. For leftovers, yes. You know what comes on your suits and your clothing after you get them pressed? He would take them off and then use them as saran wrap. And he allegedly wore his dead uncle's underwear. It wasn't just being frugal, it was just weird. It is overboard. But I've heard this time and time again. If you want to be rich, you have to be very frugal. I don't know if that's true, but a lot of rich people kind of do eccentric things sometimes to save every last dime. But another friend of theirs noticed it too, Yvette Miller. When they went out to eat, Lita never paid. Not once. And it wasn't that Yvette expected her to pick up the bill, but she would just never even offer. And she didn't understand, given the size of the house she lived in, the way that they lived, their lifestyle. But that's the thing. Lita didn't have in excess of things. He gave her a weekly allowance, only $300. And that was supposed to cover everything: the groceries, clothing, household items, entertainment. If she needed anything else, she had to ask him. And to be fair, if we're going to compare, $300 today would be $2,500. So it wasn't exactly a small sum, but what bothered her was that she wasn't included in any of the financial decisions. She didn't have access to their bank accounts, and the only time she ever saw things like bills or tax returns was when she had to sign them, and that was it. James would claim that they were asset rich but cash poor, that their wealth was all tied up in properties and investments. But to the people who knew them, it didn't come off as being cautious. It came off as he was controlling her. Because how do you justify living in a mansion, but then giving your wife an allowance that's disproportionate to your wealth, and then telling her that she's spending too much when he does most of the spending? I know that there's going to be some people that say, you know what, I take issue with this. She wasn't the one making the money, so she doesn't have a say in it. But when you're married, you're supposed to be a team. However, remember, she signed that prenuptial agreement, and he did inherit a lot of his money before they even met. In most states, if you did not acquire the money together as a couple, then it does belong just to the person who earned it before marriage, and it's not marital assets. But I think I'm getting a little too ahead of myself. James was stingy to the point that it became his whole personality. I just told you, the man reused plastic bags. He wore outdated clothing that had holes in it until they were basically falling apart. He pinched pennies in the kind of house you would expect to come with staff and a wine cellar, and it basically did. But then every now and then, usually when it only benefited him though, he would switch everything up. And then he just became Mr. Luxury. He would randomly drop a serious amount of cash on Lita, buying pearls, rubies, emeralds, diamonds, the kind of jewelry you would keep in a safe, not in a drawer. Over time, he spent over $100,000 on just pieces of jewelry for her. And the house? It looked like a museum. They had Louis XVI style furniture. I didn't know what it was. I had to look it up. It was gold gilded furniture. They had silver from Gorham and Baccarat crystal on the shelves. I wear the imitation Baccarat perfume. It smells really good. I've never heard of these other things. So you can just tell the elite and how they were living. They definitely wanted to put on a show. And he went all out. He would have fancy dinners, imported wine, 10-person table settings with the works. But the thing is, James wasn't consistent. And it wasn't coming from a place of love when he did this for Lita. She described it as periodic deprivation. That's exactly what it was. He would withhold, he would control, he would restrict, and then suddenly, boom, diamonds, lavish dinner parties, public praise of how amazing she was. But it wasn't affection, it was manipulation. It was something that most of us would call love bombing these days. And it was about timing. These over-the-top gifts usually came after something bad happened, when he needed to be seen playing the part of a devoted and generous husband. And from the outside, it worked. To people who didn't know them, they looked like a polished, high society couple. But if you knew Lita, you knew something was off. Over the next 2 years, things only got more strained. Lita started noticing things that really didn't sit right with her, and she suspected that James was cheating on her. And not just cheating, but that he possibly fathered a child with somebody else. She came home to little things that did not belong to her. There were blonde hairs in her bathroom sink, perfume that was like lingering on their sheets, and it was nothing that she knew she wore. Her mom noticed it too. These weren't just wild accusations. They were the kind of subtle signs that build and build, and you can't explain them away anymore. But she tried to. And then, Christmas of 1982, Lita found a card. It was addressed to her husband, James, and inside was a handwritten message that basically said, "I'm missing your kisses at Christmas." And it was signed with a woman's name that she didn't recognize, with a Macon address on the envelope. She didn't confront James. Instead, she got into her car, she drove to that address, and she sat outside and she waited. And when a woman finally came home, this woman was so brave. She approached her and asked her the question to her face, "Are you cheating with my husband, James Sullivan?" And the woman didn't deny it. She told Lita the truth. She and James had been involved for months. That was it. Lida packed her things, she grabbed her silver Mercedes, and she drove straight to Atlanta to stay with her family. And in true James fashion, instead of apologizing or even trying to fix things in his marriage, he retaliated. He filed for divorce. And he accused her of stealing his stuff. You know that silver Mercedes I just talked about? That was his. It wasn't hers, even though he gave it to her. He was mad that she didn't just leave, but she hurt him emotionally from stealing from him. He submitted a long list of items that he wanted returned immediately, as if she was the problem. But within a week or so, it was called off. The whole divorce over. There was some emotional late-night conference between James, Lida, and his attorney. And it ended with a new agreement, a post-nuptial agreement, the one that happens after you're already married. This one was supposed to give Lida more protection, it said. But like everything else with James, the fine print told a very different story. It gave him all the power. The numbers were different, but the dynamic was exactly the same. Starting April 1st of 1983, Lida was put on basically what she referred to as a survival budget. She was promised $15,000 a year, not a month, a year. That number wasn't just meant for her. It was supposed to cover both of them. She had to do everything. She had to buy groceries, gas, household things, clothing, gifts, going out, staying in and doing things. But in case you're wondering how much that would be in today's terms, it would be $123,000 a year. She asked for more, and he told her no. He said he couldn't afford to give her anything else. And part of the agreement, the postnuptial that they had just signed, required that she wouldn't ask for anything else moving forward. No future claims, no share of his assets. It was final. And in return, he agreed to take out a $300,000 life insurance policy with Lida as the beneficiary. So if anything happened to him, she would get $300,000. But I'm sitting here thinking, the math isn't mathing. I know people hate that saying, but it really isn't adding up. What? If you know how much this man is worth and you're going to find out more about it, you giving her $300,000 if and when you pass away is not reassurance. And a few months later, he actually canceled the policy. Oh, but he did it secretly with no explanation, no heads up. She didn't even find out until much later on. People around them had already started picking up on the way that James operated. He wasn't cold to everyone. He could be incredibly charming, but only when it worked for him. His charm was transactional. Everything seemed to be with him. If you were someone he wanted something from, he could switch on his charm like a light. But if you weren't useful for him, he would be nasty. He would be dismissive, arrogant, and he would look down on people, especially people in Georgia. He would call them intellectually inferior. He was already mentally packing for his dream life in Palm Beach. And despite all of that, despite the money control, the secrecy, the emotional distance, Lida stayed. That wasn't weakness. I know it might come off that way, like why? But that's because she was raised this way. She was raised to be loyal. She was raised to value commitment, to keep her head up in public no matter what was happening behind the scenes. And she still believed in the idea that the marriage could work, that she was building something still, that she could make it happen, that she could forgive, and that somehow maybe they could still be in love. And every time James would do something unforgivable, he followed it with something expensive and grand. Jewelry always followed betrayal. That was his pattern. Deny, deflect, distract, and then gift her into silence. By the fall of 1983, while Lida was still trying to hold everything together, James was already planning his next move without even telling her. On October 8th, he sold Crown Beverages, the multi-million-dollar company that he had inherited from his uncle, and he sold it for $5 million. Today, that would be $120 million. And Lida had no idea. She didn't find out until the deal was done. And even though he no longer owned the company, he still had access to its employees' pension fund, and he also secured a non-compete clause that paid him $20,000 a month. So this is why I say the math wasn't really working out. He was making $164,000 a month just in that agreement he made. That's more than Lida would get in a year for her allowance. So I guess you can now see the difference financially. And this is when his Palm Beach obsession became real. He had visited before, but now he was fixated. Palm Beach wasn't just a city to him, it was a finish line, a symbol that he had arrived. It was the kind of place where you could rub elbows with old money, where people whispered names like Kennedy or Pulitzer without batting an eye. James found a house, a 17,000 square foot mansion on South Ocean Boulevard with a red tile roof and an exterior striped in bold red and white stone. The locals actually nicknamed it the Ham and Cheese House because of how it looked. But to James, it was the crown jewel. It had 8 bedrooms that faced the ocean and a private tunnel to the beach. It was the kind of home you would buy to be seen. And he didn't pay for it the normal way either. James quietly took out $713,000 from a pension fund he still controlled, but it belonged to the employees of Crown Beverages. So years later, one of his office managers would sue him. But we don't have to get into all of that. This man was breaching his fiduciary duty. That was clear. He was using the pension to fund his private lifestyle, not to benefit the people it was meant for. It was not ethical. It was a mess. But you know what James' strategy always was? Do what you want. Keep all the details fuzzy and then pay off whoever tries to call you out. Straight out of the pages of most rich men or rich people's playbook. Buy them off. Palm Beach had a reputation, and it wasn't just about money. It was exclusive, yes, but in ways that went way beyond the gated communities and multi-million-dollar zip codes. This was a town built on unspoken rules, old families, old wealth, and a very white social circle, and things were slow to change. Technically, anti-discrimination laws existed, but in practice, everyone knew how things really worked. And for James Sullivan, that was the world that he wanted to be in so badly. And I'm sure you already know this, but this is where the Epstein Island is located. I also went to college right over the bridge from that island. And it was where some of the biggest and most expensive homes I'd ever seen, probably in all of the United States, aside from maybe Beverly Hills. And when James bought that home, he wasn't just planning to relocate. He felt like he was leveling up in life. He saw Palm Beach as the ultimate prize, the warm weather, the ocean views, and the neighbors with last names that you would read about in Forbes, or maybe later in a scandal. This wasn't just where rich people lived. This was where important people lived, people with connections, legacies, and clout. But Palm Beach wasn't impressed by money alone. Getting invited to the right table meant more than just buying the biggest house on the block. It meant that you had to have the right background, the right friends, the right image. And James didn't come from any of that. He was what they call new money, Irish Catholic from Boston, and worst of all, for that crowd, he didn't show up alone. He showed up with Lita. They were married, but in Palm Beach, that didn't matter. A wealthy white man bringing a black wife into some of the most exclusive spaces in the country was a problem. Not openly, of course. Nobody said anything out loud, but they didn't have to. Private clubs still ran everything, the guest list, the galas, and the social calendars. These were the same places where Lita's presence got side-eyed, questioned, or quietly even ignored. She once answered the door at their mansion, and they asked if the lady of the house was home. She was the lady of the house. That's just a yuck to me. But that didn't matter here. James, meanwhile, tried to push his way into the scene. He joined the Palm Beach Tennis Association. He went to every charity function he could sneak into. He showed up solo at art openings. He tried to buddy up to people like George Bissell, an entrepreneur who knew everyone worth knowing. He thought that he could network hard enough and then drop enough money in his mansion that he would shake the right hands and he would get in. But he didn't. If you didn't come from their circles, if you didn't have the last name that carried history, you were just another outsider with a big bank account. And again, there was Lita, or more accurately, the absence of Lita. Because as James got more obsessed with getting accepted, he started leaving her out of everything. It was quietly at first, then consistently. Dinners where she wasn't invited, events where she was too busy. He wanted to rebrand himself. And in that world, Lita just didn't fit the image he imagined. Neighbors noticed. There was a woman named Lois Terry who occasionally had dinner at their home, and she admitted that people in Palm Beach kept their distance from the couple, and it wasn't a secret. It was just something that nobody would say to their face. Because he was so obsessed by this point with appearances, his marriage now was like a liability for him. No matter how much money he threw at it, Palm Beach made it clear. He was never going to be one of them. And it's sad because Lita tried. She tried so hard. She got involved in all the local causes. She took flying lessons with James. She immersed herself in the day-to-day Palm Beach. but it just never felt like home. She wasn't actually interested in playing socialite. She had no desire to chase status. And at one point, she made it clear she never wanted to live there permanently, and her distance didn't go unnoticed. Things between her and James kept getting worse. Conversations turned into silence. The space between them didn't just grow, it just settled. Lita started seeing a psychologist. She was trying to figure out how to salvage the marriage, but the writing was already on the wall. In 1984, she asked James for something simple. She wanted space, but not just emotional space. She wanted physical space. She wanted somewhere she could breathe. And she convinced him to buy a second home back in Atlanta. It was a 4-bedroom townhouse on Slayton Drive in Buckhead, white exterior surrounded by rows of red brick mansions. The purchase price? Just over $440,000. On the outside, it looked like it was hers, but legally it wasn't. Just like the Palm Beach house, the deed had only one name on it, James Sullivan. But still, Lita claimed it as her own. She said that out of the 2 homes, the one in Atlanta was the only place she ever truly felt was hers. While Lita was pulling back, James was going full throttle. He officially registered to vote in Florida. He wanted to stay, and he inserted himself into local politics. And the following year, he hosted a private event at their mansion for the 1985 mayor election. On paper, it was a small contribution of $460, but that same year, the new mayor recommended him for a seat on the Landmark Preservation Commission. It was all about control. He would now control what could and couldn't be done to historic homes in Palm Beach. That was power, and it was very on brand for James and his image that he was trying to build. He loved it. He loved the influence, the validation, climbing high, and he could finally say it belonged there. At the same time, Lita was quietly preparing to leave all of that behind her. On August 12th of 1985, while James was out of town, Lita packed her things and she walked out of their mansion for good. According to their housekeeper, she hitched a U-Haul to her 1973 Mercedes and loaded up everything, boxes of crystal, porcelain, silver antiques, party supplies, even paper goods. It wasn't just a couple of bags. She took everything that was hers, maybe even more than what was hers, and she drove it all to her townhouse in Atlanta. 2 days later, she filed for divorce. Good for her. She also moved fast to protect herself financially. She emptied out their joint account to cover her legal fees. She intercepted one of James's $20,000 non-compete agreement checks. She wasn't playing defense anymore. She was playing hardball. But as expected, James retaliated. He canceled the insurance on her car. He shut off the electricity at her Atlanta townhouse, and he demanded that she return the money and every single item she had taken from Palm Beach. But then it was like whiplash. It was back and forth. Then he was trying to reconcile again. He reached out. He was sweet. He wanted to talk things through. And Lita was willing to consider it, but only if he changed. She told him that if they were going to move forward, some of his assets needed to be transferred into her name. Just something, anything to protect her. But James said no. He told her instead that she should just sell the Atlanta townhouse and then move back to Palm Beach with him. But she refused. And that's when it became crystal clear. Whatever was left between them, if anything, it was over. And the divorce wasn't going to be easy. It was going to be a war, and it became public. It was a spectacle. Lawyers were fighting over every one of their assets, from expensive jewelry to household little goods that they shared. James accused Lita of adultery and of using drugs, and that was shocking to her friends and family. She had to undergo weekly drug tests to refute these claims. Imagine how humiliating that felt for her. She was forced to defend her reputation. She was stripped of her dignity in court documents and in the public when he was the one that was cheating. He was the one that was putting her through hell. But she endured. She was determined to hold her ground. Meanwhile, James, behind closed doors, was struggling financially. He was doing everything, refinancing their Palm Beach mansion, and he was trying to face a bunch of deadlines. He had a lot of mounting pressure, but he kept all of his debt hidden. Emotions were running high at this point because they had a critical divorce hearing that was approaching. It was set for January 1987, and Lita turned 35 that same month on January 7th, 1987. It should have been a time to celebrate. And she did, kind of. She threw a cozy little pajama party with a few close friends. It was nothing fancy, just laughing at shared stories, late night conversations, the comfort that comes from knowing people, being with them, people who really knew her. But something felt off. Lida looked tense the entire night. Her smile that she usually had just wasn't there, and there was something underneath all that. But she wouldn't open up about it, and nobody pushed her. But you know when you can feel it? It was kind of like that uneasy feeling where somebody's trying to hide something and they don't want you to bring the whole mood down. Less than 10 days after that birthday, Lida was due back in court on January 16th. It was going to be a big day, a major hearing in her divorce case. Her legal team was finally challenging that postnuptial agreement. James had cornered her into signing it. And if the court finally tossed it out, Lida could walk away with a lot more, even that she even dreamed of. Property, cars, bank accounts, real assets of her own. And the full trial was supposed to kick off on the 26th. But this hearing on the 16th, it would have been a make or break moment. The day before, on January 15th, Lida spent the afternoon at home with her mom, Joanne, and her sister, Valencia, and they went over what to expect. They talked through the court date, the documents, and all the drama that might come. And at some point that day, Lida was supposed to have this man come over, and he was supposed to film a whole inventory video of her house. This was something James had paid for and arranged as part of the legal process. But that appointment was canceled, just suddenly, just one phone call, and it was called off. So that was up in the air, and her life was just flipped upside down. That night, Lida grabbed dinner with a friend, Bob Daniels, at a laid-back spot in Atlanta, and they ate, they caught up, and then afterward, she headed back to her townhouse. And then later, her friend Poppy Marable showed up, and Lida and Poppy had known each other for years. They met in college, and they were both going through divorces at the time. So Poppy had her daughter with her, and they came over to keep Lida company before her court hearing the next morning. They planned to stay up all night talking, but they were both exhausted, so they ended up falling asleep. Neither one of them could have known that would be the last time they ever spoke again. It's really unreal to think about how fast our lives can change or come to an end. The next morning started ordinary enough. It was gently raining outside. It was 8:30 a.m. on Friday, January 16th, and Poppy could hear the faint sounds of Lida walking around in the kitchen, making a pot of coffee. She could hear it brewing. And then the doorbell rang. They weren't expecting anyone, so the timing kind of felt odd. And then Poppy heard the hardwood floors creaking under Lida's steps as she made her way to the front door. She could hear the door open, and then she heard Lida say, "Good morning." But then silence, followed by an unthinkable sound, 2 loud popping noises. And even though it was unbelievable, Poppy knew exactly what she just heard. They were gunshots. She froze, not knowing what to think. Was someone coming in there? Were they after her and her child as well? Was her friend okay? Poppy's survival instinct kicked in. She grabbed her daughter, she pulled her into a closet, and they hid, barely breathing, until they knew they were safe. What Poppy didn't know is that a neighbor had already called 911, Robert Christensen. He told dispatch that he already raced over to Lida's house. He saw her lying on the ground outside of her front door, and he ran back home to call them. Officer Everett Thrall was the first on the scene. It was 8:20 a.m. on Friday, January 16th, and he walked up to see Lida lying lifeless inside the doorway of her townhouse. There was blood pooling underneath her head, and a long white box with pink ribbon was on the floor. The gift seemed so out of place on the ground next to Lida with blood spatter across her face and neck. It would have been romantic if it hadn't been used as bait, because it was clear that Lida had thought this was just an ordinary flower delivery. The shots had gone right through the box. One bullet casing was found just outside the door and the other one a few feet inside. Officer Thrall could see a wound to Lida's right temple. But miraculously, she was still alive. He kneeled down, he grabbed her hand, and he reassured her that help was coming. She actually squeezed his hand in response. Within minutes, Lida was rushed to a nearby hospital. Additional officers were called to the scene, and Robert Christensen was interviewed, as other officers discovered Poppy and her daughter inside the closet as they cleared every room of the house one by one. Nothing in the house had been touched. No signs of a struggle. Lida's purse was there, her jewelry untouched, antiques still in place. This was an ambush. Whoever had done this walked right up to her front door with a box of roses, waited for her to open it, and shot her the second she greeted them. So much like Valeria Marquez, a gift, a ruse, a death that was quick and calculated and cold. The neighbor, Robert, explained that he saw what happened. He'd been outside putting his trash in the receptacles around 8:15 that morning, and he was looking around doing his normal routine when he noticed a man walking towards Lita's house. Then he was standing on her front porch, and he was holding a long box of what looked like a box of flowers with a pink bow tied around the box. The neighbor said he rang the doorbell, and he even heard Lita say good morning as he turned to walk into his open garage. And then came the 2 gunshots. Robert was so scared that he ran into his backyard, but he peeked over the fence and saw the man running away from Lita's townhouse. He described the man as looking out of place. He was disheveled looking. He had a green jacket on, brown pants, dirty shoes. He was white, about 6 feet tall, hair slicked back in a kind of outdated rockabilly style. He said that after he heard the shots, he ran to Lita and helped put a towel underneath her head. Investigators immediately started canvassing the area. They talked to neighbors, they collected statements, and another neighbor, Homer Deakins, was standing in his kitchen, and he said he heard the same 2 gunshots. When he looked out, he saw a man running from Lita's house. Same description. And then a third neighbor, Margaret McIntyre, was pulling out of her driveway, and she told police a man was sprinting right past her, and he almost hit her. She said he was running from the devil. That's what it looked like to her. With these 3 witnesses, detectives were able to work out a sketch artist to come in and develop a composite. And that was only the beginning. Atlanta police assigned 2 veteran detectives to their investigation, Major Harris and Lieutenant Walker. And they could tell from the shell casings Lita was shot with a 9mm weapon. They believed from the looks of the box with the gunshot hole right through it that Lita used it to shield herself after the first bullet missed her. Since the flowers were their biggest clue they had thus far, they started checking local flower shops, and one stood out, the Botany Bay, less than a mile from Lita's townhouse. The florist told investigators that just before 8 a.m. that same morning, 2 white males had come to the shop. Now, one of them stayed in the car, and the other one came inside and paid cash for a dozen long-stemmed red roses in a white box. He didn't provide a name, he didn't leave a card, and the shop helped create a second composite sketch. This one was of the man involved in purchasing the flowers. Now, when the police compared the florist sketches with the neighbor sketch, they realized something. They were looking at 3 different faces. So they thought, this wasn't a single person, this was a team. The one that pretended to be the florist delivery person, and the 2 others who appeared to be organizing the shooting. But before the detectives even got that far, before this case became a tangled web of lies, tapes, aliases, and sketchy business connections, there was the immediate aftermath, the part that sometimes we forget because they had to make the call. Someone had to make the call to Lita's parents, and that someone happened to be Poppy. After officers cleared the scene, Poppy and her daughter were now safe. And she was the one that picked up the phone and called Joanne and Emery McClinton. She had to tell them that their daughter had been shot, that paramedics had taken her to the hospital, that she was barely holding on. At the time that the call came in, Joanne was getting ready to visit her own mother in the hospital. She wasn't expecting news like that. She wasn't expecting any news, but instead she heard that her oldest daughter, her 35-year-old, bright, beautiful, full of life daughter, had been rushed to the hospital with a bullet wound to her head. Her dad got there first. When he arrived at the townhouse, paramedics were already loading Lita into the ambulance, and by the time Joanne got there, they were gone. And sadly, Lita didn't make it. She was officially pronounced dead at the hospital shortly after she arrived. And that's how her parents found out. Not from a doctor, not from a detective, from a close friend who had to make that call that no one should have to make or get. I would rather it be her than someone cold and detached from the situation. But the detectives had to move fast. They released all 3 sketches to the public at the same time, and they sat down with Joanne and Emery McClinton, Lita's parents. And the first thing her parents said, James Sullivan has something to do with this. They didn't even hesitate. They went back in time. They explained the entire situation, the divorce, the control, the money, the house, the power dynamics, the fact that Lita had a court hearing the very next day that could blow up the postnuptial agreement and give her access to real assets. And then coincidentally, she ends up dead the day before. They did not think this was a coincidence, and neither did the investigators. So Harris and Walker turned their attention to Palm Beach. And when they showed up to talk to James Sullivan, he acted like he had nothing to hide. He agreed to a polygraph, and he passed it. He said he had an alibi, and technically he did. He was all the way in Palm Beach, 700 miles away at the time of the murder. But the investigators noticed something odd during the interview. Completely unprompted, James mentioned the name Marvin Marable. Now, you might remember this name, Poppy Marable. Marvin was married to Poppy, the same Poppy who was upstairs in the townhouse when Lida was murdered. Marvin was a former New York State trooper. He had left law enforcement and he started working in business, and somewhere along the way, he got close with James Sullivan. According to Marvin, after Lida moved back to Atlanta, she started spending a lot of time with his wife. He claimed the two of them were commiserating, and he blamed Lida for encouraging Poppy to file for divorce against him. So Marvin did something really shady. He tapped the phone line at his house without Poppy even knowing. He installed a recorder that was secretly recording more than 300 hours of phone conversations between his wife, Poppy, and James's wife, Lida. Personal conversations, divorce strategies, private feelings that they had. And then he flew to Palm Beach under a fake name, and he gave these recording tapes to James. What James planned to do was use them as evidence to discredit Lida. He would make it look like she was dating other men or acting unfaithfully, and then maybe he could convince a judge to rule against her. Maybe then he could protect his assets. At one point, Marvin said he wanted to stop recording everything. It was going too far, but James encouraged him to keep going. He said it was important. He claimed that James even offered him $30,000 if the postnuptials survived in court because of his help. He said it would help him win. Eventually, Lida and Poppy found out. They found the device, and the whole thing blew up. Poppy filed for divorce immediately. Lida went to the police. Marvin was charged with possessing an illegal eavesdropping device. Investigators questioned Marvin about the murder, but he insisted he had nothing to do with it. And the truth is, he didn't. Marvin was invasive, he was creepy, he was desperate, but there was no evidence connecting him to a murder plot. He wasn't the man seen running from her townhouse. He wasn't even in Atlanta that morning. He had no access to weapons or money, no trails of money coming in and out. There was no evidence that tied him to the shooting itself. And eventually he was cleared. But now they had something else. Proof that James wanted dirt on Lida, that he had gone out of his way to collect private recordings, that he was willing to pay for information, and that he was working closely with someone who was actively spying on Lida. He wasn't physically present at the murder scene, but he was clearly orchestrating things from behind the curtain. So investigators started pulling at other threads. One of them being Lida's male friend, Bob Daniels. Remember she went to dinner with him the night before her death? Well, he had a complicated history. At one point, he crashed his car into Lida's garage during an argument. There were rumors that he'd threatened her before, and maybe he was paid to harm her. But he had just undergone a major heart surgery. Physically, they thought he wasn't able to carry out a murder, so he was ruled out, which brought them back to their original question. If James Sullivan didn't pull the trigger, did he pay someone else to do it? That's what they thought. Lida's gone. The crime scene is processed. The flowers, the door, the 2 shell casings cataloged. Witness statements taken. Sketches made. People questioned and rumors flying. The police knew it wasn't random. The timing was too perfect. The motive was too obvious. The person who had so much to lose if Lida lived to see that court date was her husband. Her soon-to-be ex-husband. That wasn't exactly a mystery. But yet they had nothing. No arrests, no charges. It was just silence. And I know that must have been so frustrating. Could James also have been paying people to remain silent? Some assumed. But they couldn't prove it. Investigators just couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't as disconnected from Lida's murder as he wanted people to believe. And the more they looked at how he reacted afterward, the worse it got. Because according to his attorney, James found out about Lida's murder not long after it happened, but instead of calling her parents, checking on the investigation, or even pretending he cared, he took his new girlfriend out to dinner. The same night, champagne, caviar, a French restaurant in Palm Beach called Joe's. Intimate, expensive, and again, on brand for someone who just rebranded himself as Palm Beach Elite. But what about the timing? It just seemed off. The tone was completely detached, and investigators weren't just put off by all this, they were alarmed. And 3 days later, Lida's family held her funeral in Atlanta at H.M. Patterson & Son. Her parents were ready to cover the entire cost themselves. They didn't expect anything from James. But the fact that he never even offered, he didn't even show up, he never even called. It was something they would never forget. And at that point, Joanne and Emery McClinton hadn't heard a single word from him. Nothing. But guess who did call them? James's ex-wife, Catherine. She reached out to offer condolences, and over the years, the McClintons actually stayed in touch with her kids, James's 4 children, from that previous marriage. Not one of them had a relationship with their father. Not even after Lida died. The only communication James had with the funeral home came through a telegram he sent. Since he was still legally her next of kin, he had to facilitate everything in order for her to get cremated. They needed his permission, and he gave it in writing, but not a single word to the people that loved her that were grieving. And he wasn't done. After the funeral, he went to her townhouse where she had been killed, and he changed the locks. And then he accused her parents of stealing things from the house. He claimed none of the items there belonged to Lida. They were all purchased with his money. And then her family had no right to take anything. Not furniture, not keepsakes, not personal items. Nothing of their daughters. Nothing to remember her. But here's the thing. During the divorce, he actually said the exact opposite. He told the court that part of the reason why Lida didn't need any more money was because she already had plenty. She had the furniture, she had the silver, she had the furnishings and the personal belongings. But see how he wants it both ways when it suits him? Now that she was gone, suddenly all that was hers is his. And Lida's parents, they didn't even have a chance to go through her things, to not even save one piece of her, not to even grab mementos, even to just have a chance to collect anything that might have meant something or even mattered to the investigation. And if that wasn't cold enough, he also wanted to control her body after death. Yes. A relative reached out wanting to see if she could be a donor for other people in need, something that Lida, being the person she was, would have absolutely supported. Even in death, she would have wanted to help someone survive. But James said no. It was just another decision that made no sense. Unless you stopped expecting him to care, because at this point, detectives weren't just suspicious. They were convinced that this was a planned hit and that James was the one that benefited from it. But it was just suspicion. It wasn't evidence. So they started to look at his finances to see if there had been any exchanges. And that's when they realized how serious the pressure was. Just 2 months before the murder on November 25th of 1986, a Georgia court ordered him to pay about $8,000 in legal fees for Lida, plus another $2,500 in back alimony. And he had a deadline, January 15th, one day before she was shot. And that wasn't the only deadline. Back in 1981, when James bought the Palm Beach mansion, he took out 2 mortgages. And at the end of the year, he had to come up with $900,000 in cash. And none of that was going to be possible if Lida won in court. If that's not a motive, I don't know what is. So when investigators heard that James once told a friend he planned to use scorched earth tactics to make sure Lida walked away with nothing, that quote suddenly didn't feel like a metaphor. It felt like a playbook. The investigators were already suspicious, but the timeline started stacking in ways that were hard to ignore. Lida's murder just happened to fall the day before a major court hearing where James could have lost millions, and it was so convenient that he had to pay his mortgages. And then more strange details started to come into the surface. There had been that scheduled appointment. Remember, someone was supposed to come over, film the townhouse, an inventory of everything inside, part of the divorce process. It had been canceled last minute by James, called off. It felt like he knew something was coming, like he knew there would be a reason not to have to document the house if, the person fighting for it wouldn't be around much longer. And as cheap as he was, if he could save a dime by not having someone come record it, he would. And then things got even weirder. In February, investigators got a wiretap on James' home phone in Palm Beach. And during one recorded call, he casually mentioned to someone that Lida had been killed with a 9mm handgun. That was something that was never released to the public. No one was talking about the caliber, yet he knew. How? Was it a lucky guess? Still, Even as suspicious as this looked, it wasn't enough. They didn't have a trigger man. They didn't have a paper trail. They didn't have money being transferred back and forth. They didn't have any direct connection between James and the person who showed up at Lita's front door with a box of roses and a gun. So they were stuck. And James even started floating a very bizarre theory that maybe Lita had been involved in drugs and that her murder was some kind of retaliation. There was zero evidence of that. Lita had no ties to anything like that, no history, nothing in her personal life that suggested she was caught up in anything like that. But here's the thing about a rumor. It doesn't need proof, just a whisper, especially when you're far away and the story is being told by someone with money, power, and a polished image. People in Palm Beach actually believed it, even some people in Atlanta. And it created just enough doubt to slow everything down. But then came the phone records. Detectives pulled every incoming and outgoing call from James's Palm Beach mansion around the time of the murder, and that's when they saw it. 8:26 a.m. 45 minutes after Lita had been shot, a 1-minute phone call to James Sullivan's house. Not from a cell phone, not from another landline, but from a payphone at a rest stop. In where? Suwanee, Georgia. Just off I-85, that's 19 miles northeast of Atlanta, maybe a 40-minute drive from Lita's townhouse. And to police, that call looked a whole lot like a confirmation, like someone had just done what they were paid to do and made a quick call to let the boss know it's done. Because the call crossed state lines, investigation moved from local to federal, and now the FBI took over. And that came with more tools and more reach. They went through every single call made from James's phone going back 6 months. And one of those calls jumped off the page. January 13th, just 3 days before the murder. James called Robert Christensen. If that name sounds familiar, that was Lita's next door neighbor, the one that called 911. See, they weren't in touch. He hadn't spoken to Robert in a very long time, but all of a sudden he's calling out of nowhere? Robert said the whole conversation was strange. James asked if anything unusual had been happening around the neighborhood, if there had been any unusual cars parked nearby, maybe a green car. And then he asked for Lita's unlisted phone number that James didn't have. Robert said no, and that was that. But that date stuck with the investigators because that same morning on July 13th, Lita had told her friends that she was woken up just after 6 a.m. by a knock on her front door. She didn't answer. She said it made her really uncomfortable. She even made a comment later that day that said, "This is Atlanta. Nobody's opening their door at 6 o'clock in the morning." Now the pieces were starting to fit together. What if that knock wasn't random? What if it was a first attempt and she didn't answer? And what if the call to the neighbor that James was trying to make was to find out whether anyone had seen anything go down? When they lined up the dates, the times, and the conversations, it felt like a dry run. 3 days later, whoever was sent to that door came back, and this time with flowers. Before the FBI could move forward, one more detail jumped out from James's phone records. There had been a call made on that same day, January 13th, 3 days before the murder, not from his Palm Beach mansion, but from a Howard Johnson's hotel in Atlanta. But not just anywhere in Atlanta, 5 miles from Lita's townhouse. James was the man who dined in private clubs. He lived in a mansion called the Ham and Cheese House. He wasn't exactly the motel off the highway type of guy. So the fact that a call came out of that location straight to his Palm Beach line was weird. It was worth digging into. An FBI agent drove out to that motel in person. Of course, they didn't have any computer records, just a shoebox full of old check-in cards. It was very low tech and low budget. But buried in that stack were 3 names that didn't make sense. One of them was listed Johnny Furr with a North Carolina address. They traced a call made from room 518, 1 minute long, directly to James's Palm Beach house. 3 people had checked into that room. And according to motel staff, that room was where they put guests who made them nervous. So everything lined up. Witnesses near Lita's home had already described seeing a white Toyota with North Carolina plates that morning of the murder. Now they had proof that people connected to James were nearby days before it happened. And a man from North Carolina under a fake name, Johnny Furr, was at the hotel? They had to look into it. Now, there were over 150 people by that name in North Carolina, which I thought was weird because I was like, Johnny Furr? F-U-R-R, fur, Johnny. Really? 150 people by that name in North Carolina? But they were ready to start knocking on doors. And then politics got in the way. North Carolina told the FBI to back off, that they would take it from here, local cops. The lead agent was reassigned shortly after that, and the trail was cold again. Nothing was being done. And in March, a $15,000 reward was posted. In September, they raised it to $20,000, but nothing came in. And by the time the first anniversary of Lida's murder rolled around, James Sullivan had moved on. 8 months after her murder on September 26th of 1987, he actually got married to a woman named Suki Rogers. The wedding was held at the Royal Poinciana Chapel in Palm Beach. It was small, it was quiet, and very deliberate. His best man was George Bissell, the same guy who helped him climb the Palm Beach social ladder. The friendship wouldn't last, though. James would go on to lose $1 million, actually over $1 million, investing in Bissell's failed orchid business. But that's a whole nother story that I'm not telling in this video. But just like that, another year passed, and the trail was still dark. But let's backtrack a minute, because you're probably thinking, wait, James got married to someone else? You're probably thinking, who is this woman? Where does she fit in? How long had they known each other? I'll explain. Suki, whose full name was Hyosuk Rogers, was a Palm Beach socialite. She was Korean, outspoken, and kind of a wild card. Her friends described her as spicy. She described herself as someone who didn't really have any traditional skills, but she knew how to move through high society. At the time she met James, Suki was married to a man named Leonard Rogers, an investment counselor who was frequently out of town for work. And it was during one of those trips that James started showing up. They met at a cocktail party, and James was instantly locked in. This was not after the divorce, not even after the murder. This was while Lida was still very much alive, still in court with James, still fighting to be heard, still trying to protect herself. While she was doing all that, James was sneaking around Palm Beach, staying overnight at another woman's house, driving his Rolls Royce into her garage while her husband was gone for work. Leonard noticed something was off with his wife, and he hired a private investigator. And that private investigator caught it all. He watched James park his car in the garage overnight, and he had surveillance. He spoke to the housekeeper. He knew that James had been over there. There were footprints on the carpet, 2 glasses left out, cigarette and cigar ashes, and Suki? She would never let the maid change the sheets after those nights. She always insisted that she would do it herself. And when asked why, she said, "Oh, I'd eaten chocolate in bed," or "Oh, I had my period." Well, it didn't take much to know what was really going on. Did Lida know Suki or about her? She might have suspected it, but there's no record that confirmed whether she ever knew who Suki was. And by October 1986, just a few months before Lida's murder, Suki's divorce from Leonard was finalized. And exactly 8 months later, Lida was killed. James was married. But James can get a new wife, but the new wife doesn't get a new version of James. If Suki thought she was about to live happily ever after in that Palm Beach mansion, she was wrong. Because almost immediately, the relationship started showing signs, the same patterns, the same manipulation, the same control, the same emotional playbook that Lida had quietly lived through. At first, it was subtle. James seemed, intense but protective, involved but demanding. But over time, Suki said it became something else entirely. She felt watched, monitored, tracked. James needed to know where she was at all times and what she was doing and who she was with. He would randomly show up at places that he wasn't invited, and he would question her every move. He was paranoid and possessive, but always in a quiet, methodical way. Nothing chaotic, just constant pressure. And years went on like this. And just like I said with Lida, it was a slow progression into it. But it was like Suki just stepped right into Lida's shoes. When she tried to push back, he would insult her, he would cut her down, he would make her feel small, like she owed him her image, her loyalty, her silence. And eventually she broke. In 1990, just 3 years after they married, Suki filed for divorce. And her petition didn't hold back. She asked the court for a restraining order. She said she was afraid of him. Not because he hit her or anything, but because he had told her flat out, "You're dealing with a dangerous person. You're playing a dangerous game." She said he warned her to be careful, that she constantly felt on edge, and she was afraid that with one wrong move, she could set him off. On September 19th of 1990, Suki took the stand and dropped what would be the biggest bombshell of their entire divorce. She told the court she got arrested for trying to lie to cover for James over something as dumb as a traffic charge. But to him, it was big. He had close to 20 traffic tickets and had his license revoked. He wasn't supposed to be driving, but he was, and they got in an accident. And he told her to lie and say she was behind the wheel. Well, when they were sitting in their living room and she was crying in panic that she might actually go to jail, and James was desperate for her to help him, or maybe to scare her into doing so, he made a confession. According to Suki, James turned up the volume on their TV in case somebody was listening, and he leaned in and he said, "I made a terrible mistake. I hired someone to kill Lita." Suki said he told her he needed to leave the country, sell everything, and they needed to disappear. And for a moment, she actually considered going with him, but she didn't go. Instead, she told everything to her lawyer and her investigators, and she repeated it again under oath during the trial. Her story matched everything detectives already suspected. And when she laid it all out, how he isolated her, tracked her, manipulated her, the parallels were undeniable. He'd done it again. He used his charm as a weapon and money as leverage to control her. This time, the woman walked away before it was too late. But she was still afraid of what he could do. But the thing is, not only did James's attorney try to get all of this thrown out of court before she actually was allowed to say it, but the judge denied that. But James actually took the stand himself in his defense. He spent hours trying to convince everyone in that courtroom that she was lying, that Suki just wanted to make him bend and give her everything, so she was just making it up. While Suki's courtroom bombshell went on to make headlines, and the divorce itself was already raising eyebrows, it wasn't just for the drama. Authorities back in Georgia had started to tune back in to everything that was happening in Lita's case. James' behavior in his second divorce was familiar. It was controlling, vengeful, strategic, the kind of person who would rather burn everything to the ground than let someone walk away with what he thought was his. For the detectives on Lita's case, the red flags were starting to stack up. Here was another woman afraid, backed into a legal corner, fighting for control over her own life, and being met with the same tactics that Lita was up against. They never forgot about Lita's case. They just had no way of going forward. But now, with Suki saying what she did, dropping that confession, now they had a reason to dig again. But then things took a wild turn. In November, right in the middle of the divorce trial, James's attorney dropped an accusation that no one even saw coming. He didn't just deny what Suki said. He flipped the whole story. He told the court that Suki was the one behind Lita's murder. Yeah. He claimed that Suki had orchestrated the entire hit. And the motive, according to him, she wanted Lita gone because she saw her as a threat to her place, to her estate, to her future and her money. It was ridiculous. But it did delay things even more. But let me tell you what happened in June of 1991, because this part is wild. James Sullivan was still free. He was officially found guilty, but not for murder. It was for perjury, 2 counts, because he lied at his divorce trial. And you would think, okay, maybe they're getting somewhere now. Maybe he's going to go to jail, right? But instead, no. He got house arrest, a full year, followed by a year probation. And where did he have to serve it? In his mansion in Palm Beach with the air conditioning and the chef's kitchen and the ocean views. And he also had an exception by his doctor that he could leave his house for what they referred to as, I swear to God, tennis court therapy. You heard that right. He was convicted of perjury and he was allowed to leave his house arrest to hit balls on the tennis court because essentially this was good for his health. But while he was doing that, the FBI, the GBI, and the authorities in Palm Beach, they were not done with him. They were working quietly on Lita's case, but they knew they couldn't rush it. They also knew that there was more in that house than just luxury furniture, and they were right. They had a search of his premises, and they found guns. He was a convicted felon. He wasn't legally allowed to have weapons at all, let alone the kind that they found. There was a sawed-off shotgun. But that wasn't all that they found. They found his day planner. Now, James had always been obsessed about keeping records. He wrote everything down: calls, appointments, lunch meetings, tennis matches. So agents hoped the planner might give them something, some kind of clue, some kind of timestamp trail to what he was doing around the time of Lita's death. And the entries were weird. There were tons of references to Suki from November 1986 through January of 1987. He was logging lunches with her, events, plans, all carefully noted. But Lita? Nothing. Not her murder, not her funeral, not even one scribble about her. And January 16th, the day that Lita was killed, he wrote that he played tennis at 11 a.m., then had an appointment at Smith Barney at 1, then went to the Society of the Four Arts at 3, and had dinner with Suki that night. It said, "Suki with me tonight until Saturday." It was like he was logging a weekend brunch. But the one detail that made investigators stop was January 14th, 2 days before the murder. There was a single note. It said, "Get flowers." They already believed that there was a failed attempt on Lita's life on the morning of the 13th, that someone had come to her door, but she didn't answer. So now they were wondering, was that note, "Get flowers," actually code? A signal to try again, but this time bring something sweet, something disarming, a gift. Because Lita wasn't the type to just open the door to a stranger early in the morning, but for a box of red roses on her doorstep, that looks thoughtful, innocent, safe. Maybe it's a last-minute gesture from one of her friends or family members to hang in there at your divorce proceedings, that everything would go okay and it was going to be all right. But he did end up going to jail. And of course, they revoked his house arrest deal. They ordered him to finish the last 9.5 months of his sentence in Palm Beach County Jail, but still not for Lita's murder. And he served less than a year. And when he got out, he was right back to living his old lifestyle. Investigators just kept going in circles with this case. And Lita's family said, okay, if he's not going to face criminal charges right now, we'll come at him civilly. So in 1991, they filed a wrongful death lawsuit. And in 1994, they actually won. The court awarded them $4 million in damages. Finally, a win. A real win. But it didn't last. Because in 1995, James's legal team managed to get it thrown out because of a statute of limitations technicality. It's just, it makes me so frustrated. He walked away owing them nothing. He was just selling off everything. He was selling his mansion. He was quietly moving into a little apartment in Boynton Beach, which wasn't exactly luxury. But he was at least still in Florida, still coasting along. And then he just started liquidating everything. He was moving a lot of money around. He was downsizing, and he was doing it very strategically. Even his kids from his first marriage started speaking up about him. They said that he always mishandled their trust fund, money that he had been in charge of for years. But let's finally fast forward to 1998. That's 11 years after Lita was murdered. 11. The case was cold. But then out of nowhere, and I mean absolutely nowhere, this woman, Belinda Tron, casually drops a story that no one would have seen coming. Here's what happened. Belinda's working as a receptionist at a tax attorney's office in Texas. She's living a normal life, going about her day to day, probably thinking about lunch. And during one of those breaks, she's just telling her boss something she thought was kind of funny or interesting about her ex-boyfriend. That he once told her he was involved in a murder for hire. Excuse me, like, why would you be telling your boss that? And her boss, Ed, kind of stared at her like, what did you just say? She's just talking about it like it's a weird memory from a bad date, not like it's a literal hit job, as if a person died. She tells him that the man said he helped kill a Black woman in Atlanta and had something to do with money and some rich guy who didn't want to be married anymore. But now here's where it gets even crazier. That same week, Ed's wife Cheryl had been watching the TV show Extra. It's a true crime segment back in the 90s. And there was an episode she watched, and it was about Lita McClinton's case. What are the odds? So Cheryl hears her husband retelling what Belinda said to him, and she's like, wait a minute, hold on. That's Lita. That's the case I just watched. The details matched exactly. Black woman, Atlanta, murdered at her front door, received flowers, got shot. No one was arrested, no closure. It was eerie. Belinda had no idea that her ex-boyfriend's weird confession from years earlier was connected to a real case, let alone this case. I guess she thought he was kidding. So now everyone's on alert. Belinda agrees to sit down with investigators, and what she tells him is straight out of a movie. But of course, art imitates life, so what do you expect? She said years ago, she was dating this guy named Philip Anthony Harwood, a truck driver from North Carolina. Rough around the edges, not exactly a stable guy. And he liked to act bigger than he actually was. He was always flexing, always hinting that he had these deep, dark secrets. And then one day, he came home acting weird, just distant and off. And she finally asked him, what is going on? And that's when he told her he just got back from Florida, where he'd been helping a man who wanted his wife dead. Belinda didn't believe him at first. She thought he was just being dramatic, like he was trying to sound dangerous. But he was actually shady. He told her there had already been one failed attempt, that someone had went to this woman's house but didn't get inside. And this is where it gets very dark. Unintentionally dark, because Belinda said, oh, maybe you should bring flowers next time. Women always open the door for flowers. She said it as a joke. But when her boyfriend left and then a few days later came back and told her the job was done, no details, no name, just it was done, it didn't stop there. He told her to get in the car, no explanation, just drive. She just brought a blanket, climbed into the back seat, fell asleep, probably thinking they were just going on a long-haul job. He was a trucker. But when she woke up, they were parked outside a diner, some random place, not fancy at all. This man walked in, and I swear this sounds like it's scripted out of like a true crime show, but this guy had on a linen suit, boat shoes, folded newspaper under his arm. He looked like Palm Beach money. Smooth, nothing out of place. He sat down, didn't say much, just looked at her boyfriend and said, "What is she doing here?" Belinda remembered that sentence exactly, and her boyfriend played it cool. He said, "She's fine, she's with me." The man didn't argue. He just slid the folded newspaper across the table and left, and inside that paper was an envelope full of money. Belinda didn't open it, but she saw enough to know what this was. It was a payment. It wasn't a gift, it wasn't a loan, it was a payout. She didn't need to see a contract or hear a confession. She knew what she just watched. And now, more than a decade later, she's telling all of this to investigators. The flowers, the payment, the drive. The name James had never come out of her ex's mouth, but the pieces were all there. And law enforcement was listening. But who was this guy? Who was this Philip Harwood? Well, they pull up his background check, and on the surface, he looks like an average guy. Small town North Carolina, a truck driver, no paper trail. But now with Belinda talking, they start checking everything. And their first big break, they track down the moving company he used to work for, North American Van Lines. An agent drives out to this dusty old warehouse where they kept archived records in literal boxes like shoeboxes, paper files. And right there in one of those boxes, they find an old moving contract that Harwood had been assigned to. It was a job for James Sullivan. There you go. It was dated a couple months before Lita had been murdered, and Philip had moved furniture for James. So this wasn't just a name in Belinda's story anymore. James was connected to Philip, and they go deeper. Remember that mysterious payphone call? The one placed by the rest stop near Atlanta 45 minutes after Lita was shot? The 1-minute call straight to James's Palm Beach home? We knew it had to do with something like "it's done." And now that they had Philip's identity, they compared the phone records, and guess what? It was him. He made that call. It was a quick update, a confirmation. The FBI later said they used a 2-word code. Merry Christmas. Like Philip was giving him a gift. That's chilling. And when they finally found Philip, this part might surprise you, but he didn't fight it. When they showed up to arrest him, he didn't run. He didn't deny it. He just looked up and said, "I've been waiting for you guys for a long time." Of course he was. He knew they would catch up to him someday. So now Philip Harwood is in custody, and the agents sit down with him and he starts talking. And it's not vague. He's giving dates. He's giving names. It's like he's rehearsed it in his head for years. He says he met James Sullivan while he was doing a moving job for him in Palm Beach. And James approached him about a problem that he needed taken care of in Georgia. The problem was Lita. Philip said that James didn't want to go through with the divorce. He didn't want to pay alimony. He didn't want to give up the townhouse, his assets, nothing. He figured the only way out was to take her out. He offered him $25,000 to get it done, and Philip agreed. But he wasn't the shooter. He was only the getaway driver, he said. He said he did buy the roses, he planned the route, and he picked up the man who would pull the trigger, but he claimed he didn't kill Lita himself. The way he told it, there were 3 people involved, just like the investigators initially thought. He said he and the shooter had made the first attempt on January 13th, but Lita never opened the door. That's when they made the call back to James, asking for more money to try again. James refused. So 3 days later, they came back this time with flowers. Philip said he parked the car down the street. The shooter walked up to Lita's door with the box. Philip never saw her, but he heard the shots. And when the guy came running back, he had blood on his face. That's when Philip drove to the payphone and made that call, saying "Merry Christmas" to James. But even now in his confession, Philip refused to name the shooter. He only knew him by the name John. He described him as a bartender from the Carolinas, claimed he didn't know his last name, couldn't remember him at all, but it was enough. Now authorities had what they needed: a timeline, a motive, and a money trail, a confession, and the one person that Philip said set it all in motion was James Sullivan. And now it's his turn to be arrested, right? Well, you would think so. But when they signed the arrest warrant, James was already gone. No one could find him. Not his lawyer, not his family, and not the police, and not even the media. They wondered, did he already leave the country? Turns out, yes, he had. And not just recently. He had a plan this whole time. He slipped out of Florida, he crossed the border, and he started living his life overseas. He bounced around from Ireland to Costa Rica to Panama, and then finally landed in Thailand. The thing that helped him was his Irish passport. He had already traced his lineage back to Ireland and legally claimed dual citizenship. They tried following a paper trail. They started tracking his phone records, his financials, his real estate documents, everything. But nothing. He had gone dark. No calls to his family, no bank activity, just radio silence. So the FBI did something big. They put up a $500,000 reward, one of the largest for a single victim murder case at the time. And guess what? They got lucky. The FBI puts out this $500,000 reward, and people started paying attention again. The case gets featured on America's Most Wanted, and they even used this age progression sketch of James Sullivan, since no one had seen him in years. His only photo at that point was outdated. He didn't look like that anymore. But the second that episode aired, a viewer in Thailand called in the tip line. They said, "Hey, I think that guy lives in my condo building." Even though it was vague and they didn't think it was real, they went there, and guess what? James Sullivan had been living there for a while. Low-key, not in a mansion this time. He actually married a local woman, and he was just blending in, trying to keep his head down. But people remembered him because you know why? He was mean. He got mad at people for just little things. He would just lose it over the lights being too bright or someone parking too close to him. And honestly, that's what got him caught. Once that tip came in, Thai authorities started watching him carefully and quietly. And then one night they moved in, and 4 undercover officers dressed like tourists with board shorts and flip-flops waited for him and his wife to return. And the second they got inside their house, they arrested him. He was 61 years old. No surprise. He had gout, he was grumpy, and he was absolutely not going to go quietly. But it was finally over. After years of avoiding responsibility, hiding behind passports and private chefs and fake names, James Sullivan was finally in custody. And now all that was left was bringing him home and, of course, justice. Wow. I mean, the story is just insane. He really thought he was going to get away with this. Of course he did. And finally, on July 26th of 2004, nearly 2 decades of slipping through the cracks, James Sullivan finally landed back in Atlanta. And in 2006, the case finally went to trial. Nearly 20 years after Alita McClinton was murdered. It was way too long. And the trial was intense. Witnesses flew in, journalists packed the entire courtroom, and Lita's family showed up every single day. Of course, James's attorney tried to discredit every angle they could think of, but the prosecution came in ready. They had the confessions, the phone records, the Merry Christmas call from the payphone, the day planner entries, the missing entry on Lita's murder day. The cherry on top was Suki's testimony. She took the stand and repeated exactly what she said before, that James told her he hired someone to kill Lita, and then he wanted to run. And when Philip Harwood testified, he pointed directly at James and said, "That's the man who paid me." The jury didn't need long. James Sullivan was found guilty of arranging the murder of Lita McClinton. He didn't even react. And before his sentencing, he had nothing to say. Just like that, the man who spent his life trying to climb, control, and cover his tracks was sentenced to life in prison without parole. And for Lita's family, it wasn't about revenge. It was about finally seeing accountability. But wait, you might be thinking, this is not resolved. What about the shooter? What about the man who actually pulled the trigger? Well, he was never officially identified. Philip Harwood claimed he wasn't the one that killed Lita. He was just the getaway driver, remember? The other man's name was John. No last name, just a nickname. A bartender from North Carolina, someone he met through this woman named Tracy. That was it. There were no fingerprints, there was no evidence, and there was never an arrest. And here's what's crazy. Robert Christensen, the neighbor, actually ID'd Philip Harwood as the man he saw on the porch that morning, the one holding the flowers when Lita was shot, the one who walked away seconds later after the shots were fired. But Philip stuck to his story. He never changed it. So to this day, the identity of the actual shooter remains unsolved. Or is it? I guess that's what makes this case so haunting, because even with the mastermind in prison, even with a confession, even with justice finally served, I guess, there's still a piece of the story missing. Joanne McClinton later went on to say that she didn't believe in forgiveness, not for someone like James. She couldn't forget what he had taken from her family, what he had done to her daughter, and honestly, who could ever blame her? Valencia, Lita's sister, said she smiled when the sentence was read, not because it made things better, but because it meant he wouldn't be able to hurt anyone else again. He was finally going to spend the rest of his life with people who, as she put it, were more like him. James Sullivan is now in his 80s. He's still serving out a sentence in Georgia. He's still alive, but he's still locked up. And for once in his life, he's not able to spin a story his way. And Lita, she didn't get the life that she really deserved. She did get justice against this man who promised her a good life, but he ruined her life and stole it away. But you know what really hits me hard about this case? It's how little things have changed. Lita was murdered in 1987, and here we are decades later, and women are still being targeted by the people who claim to love them, who claim to protect them. Behind closed doors, they're being isolated, controlled, and in some cases even killed. And it's not always obvious on the outside. Lita's life looked perfect. She lived in a mansion, she wore diamonds, she had a nice car, the social circle. But behind all that was fear, gaslighting, and financial control and betrayal. And for years, no one saw it. Or if they did, they didn't know how deep it went. And it's still happening. And I can't help but think about Valeria Marquez. I told you about her in the beginning. The beautiful woman who built a following online, hundreds of thousands adored her. She was murdered on a live stream, shot while waiting for what she thought was a gift, a delivery, a surprise. And the delivery was real. The danger was real. She was being watched. In her case, still unsolved. We're still opening our doors for things that feel harmless, sweet, and romantic and thoughtful. And sometimes it's that exact thing that gets us hurt. Sometimes people are still performing that perfect life for social media, still curating the aesthetic feed, smiling in photos with people who might actually be manipulating when the cameras are turned off. Lita might not have had Instagram. She didn't have TikTok or YouTube, but her life, her story, it's still painfully familiar, isn't it? So here's the warning. Just because someone looks like they have it all, I know you know, that doesn't mean they're safe. Just because someone's charming, wealthy, respected, or put together doesn't mean they're incapable of violence. Look deeper, pay attention to the patterns, things that don't make sense. Because the warning signs are usually there, just like they were for Lita. She was strong, she was brilliant, she was raised in a family that taught her grace and resilience, and she deserves so much more than the way her life ended. So please don't forget her. Let her story be remembered, and let this be a reminder that we can't always control how evil shows up in our lives, but we can refuse to let it in. So thanks so much for being here for Lita's story. I will see you in my next one. Bye.